graph physics presentation. Feeling a bit under the weather, but I'll endeavor to persevere. Ugh. Just having a hard time finding the ambition to breathe properly, I think, is the problem. Living among you is just wearing me down. Anyway, so comment video. So there was a... Alright, well, one guy, I'll do the excitons, or whatever, excitons, have recently been described in a new state of matter. I would like you to debunk this. Well, to debunk it, I'd have to research about, 4 weeks worth of jargon and terminology and mush about what happens inside of carbon microtubules. And I don't think I want to do that just to help you out. Let me just say it's layers and layers of really soft science, not really hard science. So it's really not the game I'm in. I'm doing the big picture stuff, not the little tiny minutia stuff. And this is way out on a limb. And it's a limb of, sorry, but you can't tell fables from fiction or non-fiction. It's all wrapped in one. So I don't see much point in going where no man should go before. They need to go there with a flashlight because they're just walking in the dark, if I can use some kind of metaphor to make it clear that I frankly don't see it as a proper waste of human beings' time. But regardless, I mean, certainly some kind of technology can come out of this stuff, but them understanding what they're playing with is a whole different thing. I mean, I don't think they need to know the physics. You know what I'm saying? It's like the guy who built the first water screw or something. He didn't really need to understand all the physics to make it work. But anyway, so no, I'm not going to do that. Yeah, that's a simple answer. Could you reply to this video? So he posts a link to a William Lane Craig video, religious kooks. It's about this fine-tuning argument that the whole universe is fine-tuned for life and blah 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 blah, and it's really not in any way. So I guess I'll have to use analogies. Lots of comments here back and forth. I guess I should try to read a couple of them. Also, Gary has already made a response to Dr. Craig regarding this topic on the Amendum channel. Oh, yeah, no. It's good for you to remember that. So I would have no way of doing it. I didn't think it was this exact subject, but I guess it was related to this exact subject. Let's see. For this answer to work, you must assume that there is more than one try to create the universe. Okay, so this is some sort of argument that that no matter what universe you create, all of them will fail until you get to this special relationship. And no. Well, I guess I'll make some of the arguments first. First, you have to know the difference between a real constant and a fake constant. Okay, a translational constant, I guess I'll call them. But they shouldn't use the word constant. It just messes it up. They're translationons or something. Okay, so the G in the gravitational equation isn't a real constant. It's not describing any quantity in any real sense. It's not describing a way something is. It's just allowing you to translate it into some other kind of energy. So you have to, you could do the equation without the G, and you'd be perfectly fine in comparing apples to oranges, or comparing suns to Earth to the moon to a little tiny rock in space. You could do all those comparisons and the equation will work just fine and give you comparative numbers about how much force you have, like a 1 amount of force, or a 10 amount of force, or a 500 amount of force, and you'll see the difference in those numbers and it'll work just fine. Now, if you want to translate that into foot-pounds or horsepower or some other thing, well, yeah, the constant does that. So all the constant was for is to create a Newton. And the Newton was defined by Newton as a certain number of these foot-poundy things, or meters per second, or whatever the fuck it is. So it's just a translational constant. It isn't a real thing. Okay, it's just turning something into a thing. So it's like when somebody makes the analogy that the Earth is to an apple what an apple is to an atom. Alright? Now those are just relative comparisons, and they don't have to be explicitly correct, right? You could understand that if I made the entire earth out of apples, you could understand that that's a representation of a certain clump of mass. And so by this cosmological argument, they're basically saying is, well, you can just change it by 1/1000th of a billionth of a billionth. Well, guess what? 1/1000th of a billionth of the bazillions of apples the earth would be made out of would, frankly, be a lot of apples. So if I picked up one apple and threw it into space and just said, hell with it, I'm changing the cosmological constant, okay, now the earth weighs one less apple, quite obviously that's, not much of a change, not any change at all. And so you can come up with some bizarre number that says, look, this is a huge, but that's the only thing. It's just an illusion of numbers. 1% of the Earth's mass, counted in numbers, in apples, is a huge amount of apples. Okay, I mean, it's an insane. 1% of the Earth in apples is a big pile of apples. So yeah, you can make it look like it's something when it's not really anything. And it's really not anything. And you can kind of understand to yourself that you could spend like 5 or 10 or 20 or 100 or 1,000,000 lifetimes throwing apples in space all day and saying, I'm changing the cosmological constant, I'm going to change the mass of the Earth. And it wouldn't make any difference at all, realistically, in any of the function of the universe. All the life on Earth wouldn't die because I threw an apple into space. I'd have to throw a hell of a lot of apples into space before all of a sudden gravity doesn't work and the moon crashes into the Earth and the Earth crashes into the sun. I have to move a lot of apples for that to happen. So it's just completely deceptive for lots of layered reasons. So that's one of the reasons. They're just playing with a number game, and they're making it look, like, look how tiny it is on the scale. It's only a 1% change. And again, how many apples account for 1% of the Earth's mass? It's just an insane number of apples. So you can't make it sound like I'm talking about apples, because apples is the wrong way to measure the Earth's mass, quite obviously. And if you use some other thing like elephants or blue whales, then all of a sudden it doesn't, that line gets fatter and fatter and fatter. So if you use some other measuring constant, all of a sudden that line gets really fat. And so this is just an illusion of the fact that physics did do something really quite weird, in my opinion, is that it counted everything in sums that have gigantic equals. Like a Newton is like 4 bazillion zillion calories or something. I mean, the relationships are so lopsided that's part of what all this is. It's just lopsided mathematical relationships. But again, it also depends on what constant you're counting. See, the speed of light is a real constant because it's defining a real property that that photons have. So photons have the real property of the speed of traveling the speed of light. So it's a real constant, where Earth doesn't have the real property of newtons. Okay, that's just contrived. It has the real property of something. Okay, a something amount of, the equation does equal a number, but that number can be measured in any quantity, you can reduce it to anything, and they just happen in physics to always reduce things to some preposterously small thing. So they always say how many mosquitoes. So the conversion, the gravitational constant, basically is what it's doing as a translational constant. It's basically converting the Earth's mass, or its gravitational force, into how many mosquitoes would it take, to push the Earth, to move the Earth's path. And it's a preposterous way to measure it. Instead, they could have said, how many, well, even nuclear bombs. It would take a lot of nuclear bombs. But I'm just saying nuclear bombs would be a hell of a lot better than mosquitoes. You can sure as get that, right? You sure get that if it's going to be 1,000,000 nuclear bombs, you can get that if you're counting it in mosquitoes, the number is going to get insanely small, and it's going to look like, wow, look how tiny that number is, because it's so small, it has a small variance, because you've had to cut the ruler So you've had to go in with a magnifying glass to measure it on a ruler. It's so tiny a number, but it's really not. I mean, it's a huge number. It's not a tiny number. It's a huge number. You're just looking and thinking of it wrong. There's a huge number of mosquitoes, and you could obviously kill a lot of them, and it wouldn't change the universe at all. I think I'm making the point, but anyway, so I'll read another one. Do you have any reason to assume they couldn't? When you see a black cat, do you also assume he had to be black? That is out of physical necessity. So Homo sapiens is the bad guy here, and Danish physicist is the good guy. So let's see, Homo sapiens. Can you make any comparison? We don't even have an evidence that the constants could be anything different. So anyway, so the constants clearly can be something different because a lot of them are just made up. So when they talk about how much the universe is expanding, well, we know they just made that up. So that's not even a real constant. What other constants do they use for this purpose? I'm just saying that gravity is a big one, and there's a huge difference between big G, the gravitational constant, and something like c, the speed of light. And I think any rational person could understand that you probably could change the speed of light quite a bit, and the whole universe won't fall apart. But clearly there's clear relationship. So another point I'll make, this I think is the real glaring one, is these constants are describing, in essence, things happening, you know, meters per second, different things, in the 3 dimensions. Okay? And so one constant's in this dimension, one constant might be in this dimension, and one constant might be in this dimension. And so the problem is when you play this game of saying change one, well, obviously you can't change one because now you can't make a circle, for example. So if I, or a sphere. So if I change one of the constants, then all of a sudden, yeah, there's no spheres in the universe. So obviously, if all the tires aren't round, and all the cars are going to bounce around and not going to work anymore. So how much you screw up the universe in the sense of these has to be some symmetry. Symmetry is a rule if you're going to have squares and if you're going to have circles. So 2 of the most fundamental pieces of geometry, a cube and a sphere, can't work if you're not paying attention to the fact that any change you make into a constant has to make the same change proportional to all 3 dimensions. It has to regulate all 3 dimensions, and if it doesn't, then clearly that change would be catastrophic, because you can't have squares and you can't have circles, you can't have cubes and you can't have spheres, and these are both the most basic elements in the universe. Now, by my theory, spheres aren't really important, actually, because they're not even spheres, so there are technically no spheres. But see, that's like a constant like pi. Pi is, you might as well think of it as a constant, but it's not really anything. I mean, it's a very good shorthand for taking the little least lines out of a circle, but technically there are least lines in the circle. The circle is really some kind of polygon-y thing with a gazillion little flat facets. It's a faceted thing. It's not a, there's no such thing in the real math. If you got to the really smallest math, I would argue the lines get straight. There are no curved lines in fundamental physics, or elemental physics doesn't contain any circles. Just an argument I'm making that I think is reasonable. So let's read a little more of this. Okay, so Danish Phoenix says, moreover, what evidence is there that when creating a universe there is an equal likelihood of any value for the constants? Well, again, they certainly have to be proportional to maintain viability in 3 dimensions and in terms of geometry. You can't turn squares into polygons and everything going to work out okay, because it isn't, because the distances get different. Well, according to Einstein, gravity is a property of space-time, which is why G has to have a certain value, as anything else would be logically impossible. So again, Newton invented G, but I don't think G has to have, like I said, it's just a transitional constant. It's just allowing you to take your answer and translate it into some other form of force, into a force you know. So it's just telling you how many mosquitoes, or how many apples, or how many tennis balls, or how many frog eyes. It's just putting it in some other form. Okay. Homo sapien. Well, alright, we'll read his thing. The Danish physicist source about Einstein. Oh, okay, Danish physicist. Source about Einstein. Okay, so he said something about Einstein. I guess we'll read this. We don't have any reason to presume anything regarding how the constants are formed, so we shouldn't be jumping to any conclusions about Bronze Age fairy tales. Well, these people really went far afield, didn't they? I don't think that's true, so he doesn't think something about the Einstein thing. If you have a thing that is super likely and you can assume something to explain it, you do. Same goes for Pauli's clock, same goes here. Last comment. Whoops, I was conflating G with the inverse square law. My bad. Anyway, regarding the likelihood thing well, the inverse square law is another example of something you couldn't mess up with. You can't really mess up in certain circumstances. Yeah, there's no point. It's not really a constant. But it's completely dependent on spheres being a reality. Alright, like arguing how likely it is to be alive because of how unlikely in respect it would seem. What are the odds of one sperm cell winning? Well, I mean, you could just go through all the things that happened one time in the history of evolution. The eyeball, well, not the eyeball, the brain, neurons only happened once. The whole ecrotic thingy with the nucleus going inside the cell. Lots of things only happen once in the whole history of the evolution of life on Earth. And if you added up the improbabilities of life existing, it would be this insanely high number, but yet it does. So, you know, probability doesn't have much to do with reality when reality has lots of permutations to play with. But anyway, so this is a longer comment. Anyway, regarding likelihood thing, it's a bit like arguing how likely you are to be alive because of how unlikely in retrospect it would have seemed. What are the odds that one sperm cell would win? Yes, especially from the starting line. You know, what are the odds your parents would meet? Maybe it is likely, but you get the point. As for Pauli's watch, that's just a self-refuting argument. It says that someone observing a watch would conclude that it's more complex than the surroundings and therefore required a designer. Yeah, no one has to draw any of those conclusions once they know there's an external processor that's making Rube Goldberg machines all over the place. But isn't the very purpose of the argument to argue that nature itself is designed? Yes, the very function of it has it written all over it. It designs snowballs. I mean, how does nature know to make a round? Well, look at that. It made a round snowball roll down the hill. Yeah. How did it know how to do that? You know, I have no problem. How does it make to know a round water drop? How does it know to do lots of things it does that seem? How did it know how to make it round? How did it know how to make it square? How did it move, you know, how does it make water go up in a tree through the dead tissue? Alright, seeing nature as nothing but a series of deterministic processes governed by physical laws, some of which resulting in complexity in life. The designer hypothesis has to be rendered obsolete and evolutionary by evolutionary biology. Well, certainly we have a ton of evidence that there's no God, and the biggest piece of evidence that every single God story is hilariously insensible mush. I mean, I wouldn't for the life of me trust this guy to take care of my goldfish. God is an insane character. What, he's going to punish all the little baby fish if the fish makes one wrong move? Make one wrong move, fucking fish, and I'm going to curse the fuck out of all your kids. Why would I put this lunatic in charge of anything? I mean, every one of these God stories, he's just a petty, malicious, psychotic fuck. He's not even an average human being. He is well below average. I mean, he's a lot worse than Homer Simpson. God is insane. So until you come up with a fable where at least the God isn't insane, you really have no fucking luck. I mean, it's just so laughable. Why are you people falling for this complete crap? Oh, so sad. So pitifully, awfully sad. So, 2 comments by the absolute butthead, cowboy no doubt. Fake names, immortal coward. Okay, Einstein had predictions, math, and a model with rich explanatory power. Okay, so you say it's rich explanatory power. I'm just saying I could come up with a story about the invisible leprechauns who are pushing the Earth into the sun. And I can make it have rich explanatory power, but that doesn't mean it has any frickin' connection to any mechanism whatsoever that's at all reasonable. Now, you think bending space is a reasonable theory, that somehow mass knows how to bend and consume space. It's not really bending it, it's consuming it, right? It's making the space go away. And somehow the matter knows, oh, the space just went away, I have to go fill that empty space in this empty space. There's an empty space in my empty space. I must jump into it and fill it. If I don't, all the empty space will fall out of the empty space hole. So you think this is rich in explanatory power. I think it's less than a 3 Bears story. It's rich in shit. It's not rich and interesting. Alright. Like it or not, bent space does carry with it extraordinary power. I'd argue it has nothing. It has the inverse square law, which Newton already gave you. And it just gives you the invisible man is controlling the inverse square law. I mean, there's nothing. It doesn't add anything. And all the math added was this tiny little change in the the orbit of Mercury, for fuck's sake, because the speed of light was thrown in for free. So let's not give Einstein credit for that, because other people had already figured that part out. So all you got is this little bit of what I would argue is that Einstein's math is really just a concession that the sun moves as much as the planets move. The center of the sun's gravity is actually moving just as much as the planets are moving towards the sun, and the sun is moving towards the planets, and nobody talks about that part. And so Einstein threw it in the math but didn't really explain it that way. And it offers predictions. Well, we've already been over the predictions. They're all crap. So you can say it predicted something and it's been proven, the predictions have been proven, but I would argue, go ahead, go all the way back to the Eddington New York Times headline. It's a fake prediction. It's a fake validation of the prediction. It's not proven. The court is still way the fuck out on this one, and you're just pretending you got the evidence and you don't got shit. Alright, so predictions like lensing. So again, and lensing is another one. Huge gaps in this fucking thing as anything called evidence. It has lots of problems, not solutions. So, for every bit of evidence there is that it's right, there's just as much evidence that it's wrong. And you can keep pretending it's otherwise just by saying it, but that's all you're doing. You're just saying it's good evidence. It's really, really weak evidence, and if any of you shitheads had any integrity, you'd admit this isn't nearly good enough. Evidence shouldn't look this bad, and you won't admit it because you're cheaters. And so all you're demonstrating is that Einstein gave you a fable with little fuzzy happy bears in it, and so you accepted it because you don't give a fuck about the truth. You just care about having something that's fluffy and it doesn't have any. The bear's noses weren't too long. So it was all good. Now you can say that we've never observed those predictions. Yes, I can say that. Quite obviously, I say it clearly. You haven't enough evidence to assert that any of the predictions have been proven to be true. And then when we do, it all a big coincidence. And then when we do, okay, so you say you have this evidence. It's all a big coincidence. I don't say anything was a coincidence. So, straw man. So, never can these people honestly deal with an argument. I wouldn't argue that it's a coincidence because I'm basically arguing that all the other evidence where the lensing isn't where it should be is good evidence. If I was going to call your evidence a coincidence, I'd have to call that a coincidence too. So I'm not interested in playing the coincidence game. What I'm going to argue, as I've argued before, is many of these lensing images have every appearance of the residue of something that blew up. That's why they're not perfectly round. is because the things that blow up usually blow up lopsided a little bit. And there, you can imagine there was more matter on one side than there was the other side that it had to collide with, or more gravity on one side than the other side, and that's why they're not perfect spheres. But I think it's a perfectly viable explanation for what you're seeing. You're seeing the residue of long past explosions. Since the force bits just happened to, let's see, now you can say it never observed those predictions just by coincidence, since the force bits just happened to dilate, so another word I've never used, just the right amount. I've never used the word dilate, so, and the galaxies just happen to explode at just the right angle to look like lensing. Well, that's the whole joke here. So again, this fool doesn't know anything. Obviously, most of these lensing images are supposed to be spherical, and they're not. So again, it doesn't look just like it. It barely looks like it. It doesn't look like it at all to anybody, in my opinion, who's reasonable. So I'm saying right off the bat, it doesn't look like it. So you're really a deluded kook if you think the images are balanced when they're not. I mean, they show an Einstein ring, and it's not where it's not, number one, it's not a ring. It's not perfectly symmetrical or spherical. I mean, it's missing all of the necessary components to be called such a thing. So, I mean, you know, your assertion that it looks just like it when it doesn't look just like it. And I'm just pointing out that the explanation for why it doesn't look like it is because, yes, that sphere was not created by a perfect lens of gravity. And gravity would be a perfect lens. Gravity in the big universe goes spherical. That's its tendency. That's why the Earth's round, the Sun's round, the planets are all spheres. It's because that's what gravity does. It creates spheres. Okay, and fool us. And the radio waves just happen to get reflected by the sun's body odor. So again, now he's just making exaggerations. So it's not a real thing that radio waves survive scatter a lot better than visual light. So where light can't survive, where the image of something can't survive scatter, a radio wave in a signal can. That's not a real fact. So again, he calls that body odor. So to bring that up is you're somehow insulting the universe's body odor. You're not making a real point that's a real part of the physical universe. So now, again, just a slander against being honest and telling the truth. He can't deal with the real facts. He can't make a factually based argument. Instead, he has to make fake assertions about me complaining about body odor when I'm bringing up a real fact. Okay, it's like saying school buses are heavier than cars and they don't stop as fast. Okay, I point out a real fact and I bring that into court about whether or not somebody was run over by a bus or a car or a truck. And he's basically saying, well, you're making an irrelevant argument. That doesn't have anything to do with anything. What kind of idiot would care about that? See, it just, you know, this just shows their contempt for the truth. Is their inability to even paraphrase an argument accurately. I mean, it's evidence of a corrupt mind. And this reflection, unlike all other refractions we see in this, is the same for all wavelengths. So all wavelengths of what? The entire electromagnetic spectrum? No way. So I don't even know what that's a reference to, but there is no such evidence that covers all wavelengths. But that was just a coincidence. So again, he says he has some sort of evidence. I've asked you to produce the evidence. I've gone to the websites. Go ahead, show me the experiment that proves it, and I'll show where the experiment doesn't prove shit. Okay, because I mean, look, I just got done doing it, right? There's another guy saying he duplicated editing perfectly, and I went over the paper and I show you the flaws in it. You think that's hard evidence that proves something. I think it's weak evidence that just proves you people just don't give a shit about really providing real evidence. Because we've never seen the predictions come true. I'm just arguing that you don't have enough evidence to assert this is true. You're the one saying we're certain. You're an idiot if you don't believe what we believe. You don't really have a right to sway from our narrative because we've demonstrated it. Now, I'll say that's the truth about evolution. Evolution has been proven. You haven't proven any of this stuff at all. You have no right to assert that you're an imbecile if you don't think this story is the story and it must be right. Because your evidence is infinitesimally small. It is tiny evidence. It isn't volumes of evidence. It's all abstracted evidence. It's evidence you contrive with a series of assumptions. But don't say the model doesn't offer explanatory power. I've already said that it does. So again, another argument where I said somewhere that the theory doesn't fit. I'm saying the theory fits, but it fits like any God of the Gaps theory fits. It's completely you're never going to be able to prove it wrong because it's made out of a bunch of invisible forces doing invisible things to non-existent things. So, I mean, it doesn't have any physical element to it to be scrutinized. Absolutely no physics is in your physics. So, yeah, it's really hard for me to disprove the existence of your God as a possible theory. But I would argue that I can from the point of view that you invented it exactly in that atmosphere where, you obviously sat there and just invented it, not because you had a ton of evidence pointing to it, but because, hey, this gimmick gets us out of this whole problem of having to explain anything. We don't have to explain where the energy comes from. We don't have to explain how the matter knows the empty space is gone. I mean, it's just stupid. Yes. So yes, it explains by providing no physics. So if you want to believe in a non-physical universe, yes, it's very explanatory. Okay, but if you tend to think the universe is as physical as this pen, both going up and going down, then it's a shit explanation. Sorry for hitting the mic. And math. Then testable predictions. But you sound stupid, because you sound stupid. I don't even know what this is. But don't say the model doesn't offer explanatory power and math. Well, again, the math is minor and convoluted. And we certainly, educated people who know the math, could argue about what's actually in the math. And as I've stated, I've seen plenty of forum arguments where the mathematicians are arguing over what the math really is describing. And from my sense of it, there's a real viable theory that all the math is doing is moving the center of the sun. And testable predictions. Okay, again, these predictions that aren't testable and haven't been tested because you sound stupid. Well, whatever. On the other hand, your model doesn't offer any of that, but it does offer arrows. So again, another paraphrase where it doesn't offer something like an explanation for where the energy comes from, which it does offer. That it doesn't offer an explanation for magnetism that is entirely, hugely explanatory compared to your non-existent model. So my model is very complete, very detailed. Your model has nothing in it. Your model doesn't have an arrow even. It just has virtual, maybe, I don't know what the hell. That's what your model has. I don't know what the hell. Alright, and squiggly lines. So again, so I have to say that you have a bunch of squiggly line formulas. That's all you have. You don't have anything real. You don't have a real number anywhere. You just have a bunch of Latin symbols. What the fuck? And that's a viable argument. That's all we should do, is just argue in an absolutely ridiculous manner. Just pretend that, again, the theory doesn't explain the inverse square law perfectly. So you can really see why you expect everybody else to accept your theory. I'm just arguing that it's not about accepting, it's the idea that I would expect they wouldn't be vehemently and insanely petty in terms of their rejection, as if their theory is complete and that it doesn't have huge problems. And again, if you argued about some huge problem my theory had, that would be fine, but that's not what you're doing. There's no details in these comments. There's no attack of anything real. You just insult squiggly lines and arrows as symbolic representations for force. I'm not allowed to use an arrow to represent force. Even though your physics does exactly the same thing. My physics isn't allowed to do that. I mean, you're just such a piece of shit. Including scientists. Yeah, good job. Well, I can only politely ask you to just go to hell. Get the fuck away from me. Alright? We obviously can't have a conversation because you're not interested in getting to any of the facts. You just want to keep arguing rhetoric and insults. You just want to keep making attacks. Well, fuck you. I'm not interested. So I'm politely asking you to go to hell. Fuck off. I don't want to converse with you, dipshit. You're not providing anything useful here. And so I'm going to stop reading these eventually. So if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. I'll just stop reading. So don't come show up with an idiotic screen name and expect me to read your comments, because I won't. Alright, last one from the asshole then. Johnny Cochran. So another useless, pointless reference, whatever. Good evening, members of the supposed jury. Now, one thing you need to keep in mind is, does it make sense? It is rather important, and we know the jury in that case, right, ignored volumes of different sources of evidence. So you had DNA evidence, you had footprint evidence, you had the blood on the truck evidence, you had all kinds of evidence. OJ's finger just happened to get whacked really hard the very night his wife's head fell off. I mean, lots of facts they had to ignore. Now, think about this Einstein fellow. The Einstein was a patent clerk. So I've never brought up patent clerk and said Einstein wasn't qualified to think or Einstein was stupid. I never did any of that stuff. I said Einstein made a mistake. I don't think this is a great theory. And I think a bunch of other people made it big and he decided I must be smart because everybody thinks so. Now think about Einstein patent. So do you think you really believe that he has ever seen bent space? Well, let's understand he didn't. He started off with a theory in vague terms, and then Eddington forced him to essentially do some math, and so he had was it Planck? It might have been Max Planck. Well, anyway, help him do the math. All right. And so that's probably why it's such elaborate and contrived math. And the math has been redone from the time he first did it, right? So his first math wasn't quite right, even though Eddington said it was right or something like that. So let's understand that when somebody gives you the mission to force your theory to fit, and you're allowed to make your formulas as convoluted as you want to do it, that might not be an insurmountable task. But again, you're talking as if Einstein figured it out, did all the math, had a complete formula, presented it to the world, and it was correct. That's really not how the history took place. So do you really believe that he has ever seen bent space? Now remember, so again, it's not even bent space. So again, you're just using this infantile language to describe something when you know it's not bent space. Okay, the space is not bent. The space is not curved. The space is consumed. I mean, it's a three-dimensional universe. There's no bending in 3 dimensions. Now remember, what the other side wants you to believe is truly ridiculous, preposterous, outrageous. Now you have seen the pictures which are clearly could have been galaxies explode. Well, at least you got that one right. Things explode in the universe, in the big universe, that's right. And that's an explanation. But the real point isn't in explaining these photographs, quote unquote, because again, as pointed out, they're not really photographs, they're synthesized by software and created, enhanced through a lot of engineering. So it's sort of the imagination in, imagination out. So we don't know what's can be manufactured by that process. But regardless, it's not about me providing an explanation. It's about the strength of your explanation. And again, the evidence is, in my opinion, obvious in looking at them. They have now decided to fix them with dark matter. Why did they fix them with dark matter if they were right in the first place? Can you understand that? They were called the same thing, lensing, when they didn't have dark matter, and then they're still lensing when they do have dark matter. Now, can you see how that's really a huge corruption? That the math couldn't have been right in both circumstances, could it? Realistically, could you use the same exact math with the extra mass and without the extra math and expect it to come out the same? So obviously the math didn't work in the first circumstance without the dark matter. So they knew there was a problem with those things being lensed images because there wasn't enough gravity. But then they didn't say that. They said, look, it looks like an Einstein ring. Okay, the math doesn't work, but let's just say it looks like it, because that's fun. So you can't get the history right here. You just can't get a single fact right. Well, many facts right. Now remember what the other side wants you to believe. It's truly ridiculous, preposterous, outrageous. Now, alright, seen the pictures. We saw expert testimony from Star Wars nerds who said they have seen Darth Vader destroy an entire planet with a flick of a switch. A flick of a switch, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I can take you to the 60 Symbols website and point out a couple of videos there where they talk about huge explosions in the universe, the hugest releases of energy, and blah 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 blah. So you're pretending that doesn't really happen. Oh, okay. A flick of a switch. Now, do you see it? Truly believe that it is wholly improbable that the galaxy could spontaneously combust. So no one argued that anything spontaneously combusted again. So that's just a nonsense word. I never use the word spontaneous. So just more rubbish, more dishonesty. Can't make an honest argument. You have to always make a dishonest argument. And again, this preposterous argument that we don't know that these events do happen. Suns, supernova, and in rare cases, galaxies do their whole gamma ray death spiral-y thing. And huge amounts of energy can be released. Huge amounts of energy that clearly could affect another galaxy that was nearby and all that kind of crap. There's even speculation that someday some other galaxy could shoot one of these things that, in the direction of planet Earth and vaporize it from hundreds of light years away. That's their physics. So he's mocking their physics. Ask yourself, which is more probable, that space is bent, again, this false notion that the nothing of space can be pulled out of space, and that somehow matter will notice the missing nothing. So you can take nothing out of nothing, and somehow the something will know there's nothing missing. Yeah. It is a who's on first, who's on, what's on second kind of bullshit. Alright. Now, how many of you have bent nothing before? Well, it's a good question. So yeah, why not just leave it there? How many of you have bent nothing before? How many of you have seen nothing disappear? The nothing just disappeared. Not a single one of you, I bet. And yet they expect you to believe that the whole galaxy got bent by nothing. Again, I'm not arguing that a whole galaxy got bent by nothing. Again, I'm the one arguing rationally that the inverse square law is a real thing and it works. And it doesn't have anything to do with fucking bending space. That does not make sense. It does not make sense. It does not fit. It does not fit. It's full of shit. Yeah, it's very clever. Fuck off forever. And such. Alright, so enough of that crap. Haven't been too many comments lately, so yeah, so I guess that's good. Maybe I'll get some work done. Alright, but yeah, I'm not gonna bother responding. I'm sick of this. You have to make a real argument about something I really said and something I'm really arguing. These fake paraphrases of your fantasy contrivances are just so dishonest. So if you can't up your game in terms of the honesty of your arguments, I have no obligation to play with you. I don't have an obligation anyway, and I'm been respectful in asking you to fuck off, and you're still, you're just going to keep harassing me. And I don't know why you have a right to do that over and over again. I don't think you should have a right to do that. Should be a log in it. But anyway, till next time and such. and so forth and whatnot. Yeah, I think that does it. I mean, it's fine. You want to make videos that everybody ignores, it's fine. Make your videos. But if you're going to comment on my pages, I mean, I don't have any obligation to sell your shit. Like I said, you can't make a reasonable argument. So, fuck you. Make your scrolling text videos to the rest of the world. So, until next time, such.